And the second round of Brazil's presidential elections is underway as over 156 million voters will choose the next head of state in one of the most polarized, if not the most polarized, election in the history of the South American nation. Our correspondent, Brian Muir, has more details as he reports from the Zion High School in Arujá City in Sao Paulo. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, Gladys. I'm standing here in front of the high school where the Workers' Party's initial charter was signed in 1981. And the mood here in Sao Paulo is tense. I've been talking to a lot of people. It's been looking like Lula's campaign has been picking up momentum for the last couple of weeks due to a series of scandals that have rocked the Bolsonaro campaign. However, the polls that came out yesterday don't reflect that very much. There were 6 polls that announced the results yesterday, and they ranged from as little as a 2.1 point lead to an 8-point lead. But the one polling agency that correctly predicted the vote on the October 2nd first round election, Atlas, has a 1-point margin of error, and they're saying 5.6 point lead by Lula. So the thing that a lot of people are worried about is that the way that the votes are going to be announced, they're going to tally the votes in the conservative South and Southeast first. And so people are expecting that for the first 2/3 of the vote count, Bolsonaro is going to be in the lead. And people will only find out who's really going to win during the last half hour of the tally when the votes from the Northeast come in. The Northeast, historically, the center of the Brazilian left, in the first round, nearly 70% of Northeasterners voted for Lula, and it's home to 50 million people. So it's the one region that could make a big difference in this election.
Yeah, we know that there are some regions that have the trend to vote for some candidates. But I have a question for you, Brian. We know that there are several vote suppression strategies there in Brazil. For example, we know that big companies are harassing and threatening their workers to avoid that they vote for Lula. In this case, they want to secure support for Bolsonaro. Do you have any information, any appreciation, any views on this matter? Because how the voting day is going on besides or despite these vote suppression strategies?
Well, I mean, that's key to Bolsonaro holding on to his mandate, is trying to keep poor people and working class from voting, because they've been voting in favor of Lula at a 2-to-1 ratio. So in addition to over 1,000 reports of bosses threatening to fire their employees if they don't vote for Bolsonaro, they've all been reported and are being investigated. There are cases of mayors of local cities trying to cancel the tradition on election day of free public transportation. The São Paulo governor tried to cancel free public transportation for the entire state. At the last minute, this attempt was overthrown. So all the buses, trains, and subways in São Paulo are running for free, And there are cases of towns in the more rural areas, like in the Northeast, in the state of Paraíba, where federal police and highway police are blocking off roads coming into the towns and harassing everybody, asking to see their documents, slowing everybody's ability down to get into the cities to vote, into the towns. Now, the Superior Electoral Court has been fighting against this tooth and nail, and Justice Alexander de Moraes yesterday, he issued a court order against the federal police and the federal highway police to prevent them from doing these tactics, except there's already a few reports of this happening, as I said before, especially in the state of Paraíba, which is one of the regions where the highest percentage of people voted for Lula in the first round.
When I listen to these statements of you about how the public transportation is being halted, I have a feeling that this is a rerun of Chile's presidential election, because back then the right wing did the same to suppress vote from the poor locations and the poor people. But now I have another question for you. In any case, Bolsonaro said after he cast his ballot, he said, after all of this, at the end of the day, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm quoting, he said, we are going to be victorious. That's a huge statement. I think that's a big remark coming from someone that is threatening to make a coup d'etat, to perform a coup d'etat against himself and against the democratic powers in the country. What do you think about it?
Well, he's been threatening this auto coup for about a year and a half. And in one sense, constantly complaining that the electronic voting system is fraudulent has put the left on the defensive, and it makes them harder to complain about the actual voter fraud that some of Bolsonaro's supporters are doing, like these methods I just told you, the bosses, the police, and all of that. Because for the last year and a half, the left has been saying, no, we defend our electoral process. Our electoral process is fine. You know, the real fraud is not happening with the voting machines. It's happening on the streets. You know, there's even been cases of violence and threats against people with red shirts on the street and things like that. So uh, what we know from an internal study of the military that was leaked to the press 2 weeks ago is that the army leadership is not on board, at least this is what they said at the time, not on board with supporting Bolsonaro if he tries to rupture with democracy. But the Navy and the Air Force would support that. Luckily, the Army is over twice as large as both of those other armed forces combined, but it's still troubling. And we don't know how valid that report even was, really, because a lot of the top generals in Bolsonaro's cabinet, retired generals, have been saying really, kind of like troubling things all week about how we have to do everything we can to prevent Lula from taking power. And so really, all eyes are going to be on Brazil when this day is over. As I said before, it's like probably the most stressful, you said it, the most stressful election since the return to democracy after the US-backed military dictatorship fell in 1985.
So yeah, we have this information, Brian, and we thank you for your work and your report from this site.
Thanks for having me.